Some confrontations don't begin with shouting. They start with silence, the kind that wraps itself in applause, or a smile that lingers half a second too long. Arnold Schwarzenegger had done hundreds of interviews in his life. But that night, under soft lights and scripted laughter, something felt off. Because behind the charm, behind the practiced jokes, was a question meant to cut. And Arnold, the man who had survived by standing still while others shouted, saw it coming. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe silence can be louder than applause, don't forget to subscribe. The marquee outside the studio read like any other night, "Late Talk Tonight with Stephen Colbert." Inside, the band played its usual cheerful jazz riff, warming up a crowd who knew exactly when to laugh, when to clap, and when to nod. At 8:06 p.m., Arnold Schwarzenegger walked onto the set. The applause was immediate, not wild, but respectful. At 76, his frame wasn't as imposing as it once was, but the presence was unchanged. Calm, composed, upright. He wore a charcoal jacket over a black button-down, no tie. Just a faint medal tucked beneath his collar, subtle enough to ignore, sharp enough to notice. He extended a hand toward Stephen Colbert, the host. Colbert took it with an exaggerated grin, slapping Arnold's shoulder like they were old college friends, though they'd only met once, backstage, 20 minutes prior. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colbert beamed into camera one, "the man who taught us that robots of heart and bodybuilders can govern entire states, Arnold Schwarzenegger." The crowd cheered. Arnold nodded politely, lowering himself into the guest chair, posture straight as ever. For the first few minutes, everything followed the script. Light banter about California weather, Arnold's plant-based diet, and a joke about how many push-ups he could still do at his age. Arnold answered with dry charm, never showing more than necessary. "You still wake up at 4:30 in the morning, right?" Colbert asked, smirking as he reached for his cue cards. "Even now? Even when you're not filming or campaigning?" Arnold nodded once. "Yes. Same routine for 40 years. Colbert turned to the audience, exaggerated his eyebrows. "Folks, this man is not human." Laughter. "What exactly do you do at that hour? Wrestle bears? Bench press Tesla batteries?" More laughter. Arnold waited. "I read. Then I train. Then I work." Colbert laughed again, louder now. "You ever think maybe that's a bit much? I mean, you're not saving the world anymore, right?" A flicker. Not anger, something quieter. A tightening behind Arnold's eyes. "I didn't do it to save the world," he said slowly. "I did it to survive it." Colbert blinked, just for a second. A pause that wasn't planned. He shuffled his cards, tried to pivot. Right. Well, I know you've got a new film out, not an action one this time, folks, but a documentary about factory workers. Is that right?" Arnold nodded. "It's called Hands. It follows 6 working families in Ohio and Pennsylvania. People rebuilding their lives after the pandemic. I spent a year listening to them." Colbert raised an eyebrow. "Listening? Not leading?" Arnold turned toward him. "Sometimes listening is the hardest thing to do. But it's the most human." The crowd murmured, not applause, just quiet. Colbert sat back. Then, the pivot. "But don't you think," he said casually, "that it's a little convenient? For someone with a mansion in Brentwood, 5 homes across the world, and a decades-long political career, to suddenly be the voice of the working class." There it was. The first incision. Arnold didn't flinch. He didn't blink. "I didn't claim to be their voice," he said. "I offered my platform to let them speak." Colbert leaned forward, smile growing tighter. "Sure, but isn't that part of the myth? The idea that a guy who used to lift weights in Austria still understands what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck in Pittsburgh." Silence. The band had stopped. No cue from the booth. Arnold looked at him. Held the silence. Then, with deliberate calm, "Do you know what it's like to grow up with no heating in winter? To use a bucket as a toilet? I remember the smell. I remember the cold. And I remember the hunger." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean in. But the air shifted. I never forgot where I came from, Marcus. That's why I'm still standing. That's why I made this film. The camera cut to the audience, frozen faces, no one laughing. Colbert's grin faltered. Well, we'll be right back, he said quickly. Stay with us. Arnold Schwarzenegger, folks. But when the show returned, Arnold's chair was empty. And that's when the silence started to speak. They cut to commercial 37 seconds early. The band fumbled into a closing riff, the cue light flickered red, and the studio lights dimmed just slightly, not off, but enough to cool the room by a few emotional degrees. The crew moved quickly, but not confidently. There was a tightness in the way they approached Arnold's chair, not to check on him, but to give him space. Arnold remained seated, not looking at Stephen Colbert, not drinking the complimentary water, just staring at the floor in front of him, elbows on knees, hands folded. Across the stage, Stephen Colbert took off his earpiece for the first time that night. The smile on his face evaporated the second he turned away from the cameras. He whispered something to his producer, fast and clipped. She nodded, already on the move. The moment was fragile. That kind of fragility you feel in a church before a confession. And somehow, despite the silence, everyone in the room could feel it. Something had cracked, not loud, but deep. They'd expected a warm segment. Some nostalgia, some laughs. Maybe a short clip from the film. But now the teleprompter scrolled blank. The cards were useless. A junior camera operator leaned toward her colleague. Was that planned? He shook his head. Didn't feel like it. In the green room, a production assistant pulled up Twitter. #Schwarzenegger was already trending. Meanwhile, back on set, the countdown resumed. 5, 4, 3. But when the cameras came back on, Arnold's chair was empty. Stephen Colbert smiled, too wide. Unfortunately, Arnold had to step away during the break. But we've got a great show ahead, so don't go anywhere.
No explanation. No detail.
Just pivot. But the audience didn't buy it. The applause was thin. Confused. Some clapped slowly, reluctantly. Others glanced around the room as if waiting for a reveal. A punchline. A twist. Something. Nothing came. And in that nothing, something shifted. Because the truth wasn't on stage anymore. It was backstage. Behind the curtain, just out of frame, Arnold stood near a corridor lit by overhead fluorescence, one hand resting on the back of a folding chair. His jacket was still buttoned. His breath steady. The same man who'd once stood in front of world leaders without flinching now stood facing a television monitor that had just cut him off. A producer approached carefully. Early 30s, headset still around his neck. "Mr. Schwarzenegger, everything all right?" the young man asked. Arnold turned to him, eyes clear. "You've been working here long?" 6 years, the producer replied. "Started as a stagehand." Arnold nodded. Then you know when a question isn't really a question. The producer didn't answer. He didn't need to. Across the hallway, Marcus Stephen Colbert stormed out of the studio, mic dangling from his collar. His voice was low but sharp, like a string about to snap. "You don't hijack my segment," he hissed to his showrunner. He went off script. He made it political. "No," the showrunner said, voice tight. "You did." Colbert's eyes flared. "We're not here to babysit nostalgia. We're here to challenge narratives." "And whose narrative are you challenging, Marcus?" someone asked. It was Arnold. He hadn't moved fast. Just deliberately. Like a man walking into a courtroom with a truth no one expected. Stephen Colbert turned. "You're still here." Arnold nodded once. "I was invited. Remember." "You hijacked the interview," Colbert snapped. "Turned a friendly segment into a lecture." Arnold stepped closer. Not threatening. Just unshakable. "I was asked why I wake up at 4:30. I answered. I was asked why I made a film about workers. I answered." He paused. "Then you asked if I was still allowed to remember my own childhood." The hallway went silent. You didn't like the answer, Arnold continued. So you changed the question. You didn't want to hear about the people in my film. You wanted to hear about me, and then punish me for the answers. Colbert shook his head. You were grandstanding. Arnold looked around. At the crew. At the assistant holding a clipboard with shaky hands. At the PA whose eyes were red from stress. You think because I wear a medal, because I speak slow, that I came here to fight, Arnold said. But I came here to share stories that aren't mine. And you made it about me, so you could make it about you. A long silence. Then Colbert leaned in. Let me tell you something, Arnold. This is my stage. I set the tone. I decide when the applause comes. Arnold smiled. Not with his mouth, with his eyes. The kind of smile that holds back disappointment more than contempt. You know what I learned growing up in a one-room house, he said softly. Applause is cheap. Respect is earned. He turned to leave. The corridor widened as he walked. No security needed. No staff ushering him. Just the soft sound of his steps, echoing through a hallway built for egos but not for truth. And behind him, in the space where performance used to be, there was only stillness. The next guest on the show, a young pop singer promoting her first album, peeked around the curtain. She whispered to a grip, "What happened?" He didn't look up. "Something real," he said. "That's what happened." The show came back from commercial with a clipped jingle and a wide shot of the stage, but something was off. Arnold had returned to his chair, but the energy was no longer playful. He sat centered, legs grounded, spine perfectly upright.
No smile.
Just presence. Colbert looked tense, mask in place but cracking at the corners. His shoulders stiffened beneath his tailored blazer. His cue cards trembled slightly as he set them down, switching to improvisation, the kind that wasn't funny anymore. So, we're back with Arnold Schwarzenegger, he said, voice a little too high, a little too smooth. And before the break, we were just having a spirited chat. Arnold didn't respond. Just nodded once. Colbert leaned in. Let's stay with that for a moment. You said something interesting, that you never forgot where you came from. But isn't it true that you left all that behind? I mean, you don't live in Thal, Austria anymore. You live in a compound. You've got chefs, drivers, security teams. Doesn't that distance you from the people you claim to understand? The room tensed again. The question sounded intellectual, but the edge beneath it was personal. Arnold took a breath.
No rush.
No visible shift in posture. But his eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in clarity. I left the village, he said. Not the memory. Colbert blinked. Arnold's voice had dropped half an octave. It landed heavier now. More grounded. I still remember the sound of my mother washing clothes in a metal bucket before sunrise, he continued. I remember carrying bricks up a hill at 14. I remember my father making me split logs every winter, even when my hands bled. That doesn't leave you, Marcus. Not when you've lived it. There was no music cue this time. No laugh track. Just breath, his, the audience's, and Colbert's. But what I remember most, Arnold said, is what it meant to have dignity. Even when we had nothing. Especially then. Colbert shifted in his chair. That's moving, Arnold. But here's the thing, don't you think it's a little convenient to romanticize the working class when you're not one of them anymore? Arnold paused. And then, very quietly, I didn't come here to romanticize anything. I came here to respect it. It was a sentence so simple it stopped the air. The kind of line that doesn't need emphasis, because the silence afterward amplifies it better than applause ever could. Colbert hesitated. He could feel control slipping, the narrative, the rhythm, the audience. So he reached. But you're selling a film, Arnold. Let's be honest. That's why you're here. And in today's world, people are skeptical of celebrities who package struggle and call it empathy. Don't you think your story plays into that? It was meant to corner him, to force an admission or a stumble. But Arnold didn't move. He let the words float, hang, and then collapse under their own weight. I'm not selling anything, he said.
I'm testifying.
Colbert tried to laugh. It didn't land. His voice wavered. Testifying. Arnold turned to face him fully. The studio lights caught the crease of his temple, the years that lined his face but never bent it. Yes. Because I've seen what happens when dignity is taken from people. When they're told their work is invisible. When they're told their voices only matter if they sound like someone else's. I made this film to show the world that sweat still matters. That effort still matters. That character still matters. His voice didn't rise. It deepened. And in that depth, it struck something ancient. The audience was frozen. Some with hands clasped. Others with eyes wide. It was no longer a TV segment. It was something else now. Colbert licked his lips, flustered. But you're not one of them anymore. You haven't been for a long time. Arnold held his gaze. You're right, he said. I haven't lived paycheck to paycheck for decades. But I've never used that as a reason to forget those who still do. He paused, eyes never leaving Colbert's. What I find strange, Marcus, is that you're more uncomfortable with me honoring my past than with you dismissing it. That was it. The twist. The reversal. The moral table flipped in real time. Arnold didn't have to shout. He didn't have to win. He just had to not flinch. And in that moment, the crowd didn't applaud, not out of disrespect, but out of reverence. Because something sacred had entered the room, a man defending truth not with performance, but with stillness. Then, it happened. A flick of the hand from the booth. A sudden switch to commercial, 15 seconds ahead of schedule. Just like that, the feed cut. The last image before blackout, Colbert, leaning forward with one final retort on his lips, and Arnold, unmoved. Backstage, a segment producer stood up abruptly. Did we just? The showrunner sighed. They pulled the cord.
No explanation. No permission.
Just fear. Because a man had spoken plainly, and they didn't know what to do with it. The moment the commercial hit, the studio floor changed. Not audibly, no one shouted. No one cried. But attention dropped, heavy and invisible, like humidity before a storm. Arnold didn't move. He remained in his chair, posture unchanged, hands resting on his thighs like a man waiting for something he already knew wouldn't come. Across the stage, the crew began to shuffle, not from urgency, but from uncertainty. People checked headsets that weren't broken, fiddled with light boards that didn't need fixing. The floor manager stared at the countdown screen as if it could offer an answer. No one told Arnold to leave. No one told him to stay. It was that kind of silence, the kind that wants to pretend nothing happened, but knows it did. From the hallway, Colbert burst through the curtain. His blazer was open, collar slightly askew, face flushed not from heat, but from exposure. Why the hell did we cut? He snapped, directing his voice toward the control booth. The executive producer stepped out of the shadows. Older, lean, grey temples, the kind of man who had survived 4 decades of network politics by never showing emotion. We cut, he said calmly, because you lost the room. Colbert's mouth opened, but nothing came. Behind them, the set remained frozen. A still image of Arnold on the monitor, paused mid-breath. The producer continued. You invited a man to speak about dignity. Then you questioned whether he still deserved his own past. Colbert scoffed. Oh, come on. He's been rehearsing that underdog story for 40 years. It's branding. Muscle turned morality. I wasn't going to sit there and nod like everyone else. The producer stared at him, unblinking. It's not the nodding that's the problem. It's the need to win the room, even if it means burning it down. Backstage, a makeup artist approached Arnold with a small towel and a bottle of water. He declined both. I'm fine, he said, voice even. She hesitated. They're saying we might go back on in a minute. Arnold looked toward the curtain. No, you won't. She nodded, not surprised. A young intern hovered nearby, clutching a clipboard like a shield. She wasn't part of any decision, but still felt like she'd done something wrong. She'd admired Arnold for years, not for the movies, but for the interviews no one remembered. The quiet ones. The ones where he talked about his mother's hands or working construction at dawn. She took a small step forward. "Sir, I just wanted to say, I think they brought you here for a headline. But you gave them a mirror." Arnold turned to her. And for the first time all night, he smiled. Not wide. Just enough to let her know he heard her. "Thank you," he said. "That's all I ever hope for." Back in the writer's room, the spin had already begun. "He went off script," said a junior segment producer, flipping through a notepad. "We had a breakdown of beats. He skipped 2 entire transitions." The head writer shook his head. He didn't skip anything. He just didn't play along. The showrunner paced near the whiteboard, wiping off planned jokes with the edge of her sleeve. "What do we say publicly? Technical glitch. Doesn't explain why he didn't return," someone said. "Say the segment ran long," Colbert muttered from the doorway. His voice was cold now, colder than it had been on air. "Say we were running behind and had to reshuffle." The room was quiet. Then someone whispered, "People saw what happened, Marcus. They heard what he said." Colbert snapped. "Then make them hear it." In the hallway, Arnold was gathering his things. Not rushed. Not dramatic. A quiet undoing of presence, as if he'd never been there at all. The executive producer approached slowly. "Arnold," he said carefully, "we'd like to have you back. Maybe in a week or 2, when the conversation's cooled." Arnold looked up. His eyes didn't narrow. They didn't burn. They simply saw through. "It won't cool," he said. "Because it wasn't heat. It was light." The producer tried again. "We just think maybe the audience needs more context. You know how these things get clipped online." Arnold nodded. "That's the problem. Everyone wants the clip. No one wants the conversation." He stepped past the man, paused just long enough to add, "And for the record, I've played heroes, villains, even machines. But I've never played poor. That part was real." Then he left. Outside the building, paparazzi were already waiting. Arnold didn't stop. Didn't wave. Just walked with quiet intent toward the black SUV idling by the curb. A light drizzle began to fall, soft, almost cinematic. The assistant from earlier ran up behind him, breathless. "They said to tell you there's no hard feelings." Arnold opened the door, looked back once. "I know," he said. "That's the problem." And with that, he climbed inside and closed the door. Back inside, Stephen Colbert sat alone in his dressing room. The monitor still glowed, a paused frame of Arnold, mid-sentence, eyes steady. He stared at it for a long time. Then he stood, pulled the power cord, and let the screen go black. But the silence stayed. And for the first time in his career, it didn't feel like control. It felt like consequence. The hallway to the dressing rooms was quieter than the rest of the building, insulated, soundproofed, a space built for retreat. But tonight, it was a corridor of reckoning. Arnold's footsteps were slow, steady. Not hesitant. Not theatrical. Just deliberate. He passed a sound tech adjusting cables, a stagehand coiling lights. None of them made eye contact. Not out of disrespect. Out of understanding. Outside dressing room number 3, he stopped.
No knock. No noise.
Just silence, long enough to let it be felt. Then, calmly, "Stephen. We need to talk." Inside, Colbert sat slumped behind a makeup station, tie loosened, expression unreadable. His executive producer hovered near the wall, tense. The head writer was mid-sentence when the voice outside cut through. Colbert straightened. The producer peeked out. "Mr. Schwarzenegger, now's not a good, I didn't ask you," Arnold replied, his voice low, but solid. The producer looked to Colbert. Stephen hesitated. Then sighed. 5 minutes. Alone. The team filed out quietly. The door shut with a dull click. Just the two of them now.
No camera.
No safety net. Just breath and history. Arnold remained standing. Colbert stayed seated. What was that out there? Arnold asked. Not as an accusation. As a demand for clarity. Colbert didn't flinch. This show isn't a parade ground. It's a place for discourse. Arnold raised an eyebrow. Discourse doesn't start with doubt. It starts with listening. Colbert crossed his arms. You came in here selling a story about blue-collar America while wearing a watch that costs more than their annual rent. Forgive me for asking questions. No, Arnold said. I don't need forgiveness. I need honesty. You didn't ask a question. You launched an indictment, hoping I'd crack, so your monologue tomorrow would write itself. Colbert leaned forward. So you think I brought you here just to corner you? Arnold didn't answer right away. He looked at the table between them, the untouched water bottles, the cue cards now discarded in a pile. I think you invited a version of me, he said finally. The caricature. The Austrian Terminator turned governor turned elder statesman. But when I showed up as a man, with memory, with contradiction, you didn't know what to do. Colbert stood now, adjusting his blazer like armor. I challenge people, Arnold. That's the job. You're not immune to it because you lifted weights in the snow or passed green energy bills in California. And I didn't ask to be, Arnold said. But you don't get to cut into a man's past like it's a bit for laughs, and then act surprised when it bleeds. The room was quiet again. Then Colbert spoke, quieter, but sharper. You've built an empire on that past. You wrote it into your speeches, your brand, your Netflix deals. You made it part of the myth. So yeah, I questioned whether it was still yours, or just something you rented out when convenient. Arnold stepped closer. Not confrontational, but grounded. As if anchoring the room by presence alone. You think pain becomes invalid just because it survived, he asked. You think memory loses meaning when it's spoken too often? Then maybe you've never had to hold on to it for dear life. Colbert stared. No retort this time. Arnold continued. When I was 15, I slept in a room with cracked windows and mold on the ceiling. My father beat discipline into my bones. I ran from that house before I had a name people could spell. And every brick I carried after that, in Munich, in Venice, in LA, I carried with both hands and one memory, never go back. Not just physically. Mentally. He paused. So no, Stephen, I don't need you to approve of how I tell my story. Because I lived it. And I still carry it, even when your writers decide it's outdated. For the first time, Colbert looked unsure. His jaw relaxed. His shoulders slumped slightly. I didn't mean to disrespect your story, he said, voice almost human now. Sometimes these interviews, they blur. And we look for angles that cut through. Arnold nodded. And sometimes they cut too deep. A knock at the door. 2 minutes, came the assistant's voice. We need you back on set, Mr. Colbert. Colbert exhaled, turned toward the mirror, avoiding Arnold's gaze. We're done here. Arnold didn't move. Then, slowly, before I go, let me leave you with something. Colbert paused. His reflection didn't blink. Arnold's voice dropped. I came to this country with nothing but a duffel bag and a photo of my mother. I didn't speak the language. I didn't have connections. But I learned to stand still when others shouted. That's how I survived. That's how I grew. He stepped back. You shout for applause. I pause for truth. Then he walked to the door. Colbert turned. You think your truth matters more than mine? Arnold looked back. No, he said. But I don't use mine to corner guests. He opened the door. The hallway buzzed with distant crew chatter, light flickers, and nervous interns. He stepped out. And behind him, Stephen Colbert sat alone, in a room full of mirrors that, tonight, didn't flatter. The hallway outside the dressing room was brighter now. The overhead lights had kicked into full brightness, as if trying to compensate for something that had already gone dim. Arnold walked slowly, calmly, without looking back. A producer caught up beside him, papers in hand, voice tentative. "Mr. Schwarzenegger, if you're open to it, we'd love to issue a follow-up statement. Maybe clarify the segment for the audience. Say it was a scheduling mix-up." Arnold didn't stop walking. "No need." The producer blinked. "It's just, there's a lot of chatter already. If we don't set the narrative now, someone else will." Arnold paused at the exit door, hand resting on the steel handle. He turned. "Just once. I didn't come here for a narrative," he said. "I came to talk about people no one listens to. And you proved why that still matters." Then he pushed the door open, walked into the cool night air, and left it all behind. Inside the studio, damage control had begun. Colbert stood in the center of the writer's bullpen, surrounded by half-written cue cards and blinking teleprompters. The showrunner was on the phone with the network. The PR head paced back and forth with a crisis template email already half-typed. "Where's the official angle?" someone asked. Segment ran long. Schedule adjusted. "No tension, no drama," the showrunner replied mechanically. "But what about the audience?" a junior staffer asked. "They saw it. They felt it." Colbert said nothing. He stared at the floor for a long time, then looked up at the team. "Push the musical guest up. I'll fill time with a longer monologue." No mention of Arnold. None. The room nodded. No one agreed, but they nodded. Because to do otherwise meant acknowledging that something had broken. And no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Backstage, the intern from earlier stood frozen near the service door. She'd watched Arnold walk out without security, without entourage, without even a glance toward the flashing cameras at the lot gate. He didn't wave. Didn't posture. Just left. A simple exit. But something about it stayed. On set, the applause sign blinked again. Stephen Colbert adjusted his tie in the mirror. His reflection looked polished. But it didn't look convincing. In the control room, the audio technician rewound the tape of the segment, not for editing, but for clarity. He paused it on one frame, Arnold, eyes steady, saying, "You shout for applause. I pause for truth." The line sat in the room like a confession. One of the assistant editors murmured, "They're going to cut this to pieces." "Maybe," the technician said. But the whole room heard it. Outside, Arnold's SUV was waiting. He stepped inside without speaking. The driver asked nothing, just pulled away from the curb, headlights catching the edges of the studio's name etched in glass, a name that, for one night, meant less than the silence that followed it. As they passed the guard booth, a security officer gave a small wave. Arnold returned it with a slight nod. The world didn't stop. But something in it had shifted. Inside Colbert's office, the door shut with a dull finality. The head writer sat on the edge of the couch, scrolling through early social media reactions. "Clips are already out," he said. "No footage of the walkout yet. But the quotes are everywhere." Colbert didn't respond. He stood by the window, looking down at the alley behind the studio. A place few people ever saw. A place where guests came and left without fanfare. "That's where he went out?" Colbert asked. The writer nodded. "Yeah. Refused a back escort. Didn't want a car from us either." Colbert stared a moment longer. Then sat down, slow and deliberate. "I didn't think it would go that way," he muttered. The writer hesitated. "Did you want it to?" Colbert didn't answer. Because the truth was, he didn't know. Later that night, the final segment aired as planned. The jokes landed, but barely. The musical guest smiled wide, but the claps were soft, scattered. Colbert thanked the crowd. The lights dimmed. And as the credits rolled, there was a sense, not spoken, but present, that something important had just slipped through their fingers. At home, Arnold poured a cup of chamomile tea and sat on his back patio. No phone. No news feed. Just the night air and the quiet hum of crickets along the hills. He didn't replay the words. He didn't need to. The silence had said enough. And as the city buzzed below, parsing clips, quoting lines, drafting think pieces, Arnold did what he always had. He stayed still. And in that stillness, he stood taller than ever. The taping ended like they always do. The applause sign blinked. The house lights lifted to a softer glow. Stephen Colbert stood at center stage, arms open, delivering his final line with a grin so practiced it was indistinguishable from sincerity. And that's our show. Good night, everyone. The band played. The cameras pulled wide. Crew members exhaled as if relieved to reach the finish line. But the air wasn't the same. Even the laughter sounded borrowed. And when the credits rolled, they rolled over a void no monologue could fill. Audience members filed out slower than usual. Not chatting. Not checking their phones. Just walking, as if carrying something they didn't know how to set down. A woman in her 60s turned to her husband. That was strange, wasn't it? He nodded. He never came back. She looked back toward the stage. And they acted like he was never there. Backstage, the staff moved with quiet precision. Too precise. Like dancers following a choreography that no longer matched the music. In the control booth, the lead editor stared at the footage, the raw feed, uncut. There was Arnold, mid-sentence. Then black. He hovered over the timeline, finger on the spacebar. He could play it back. He could cut it down. He could smooth the edges. But he didn't. He just watched. Not as a technician. As a witness. In the writer's room, the head writer rubbed his eyes. Tomorrow's headlines will write themselves, someone muttered. Not if we get ahead of it, another said. But no one opened a laptop. Because for the first time, no one knew which version of the story they were allowed to tell. The version where nothing happened? Or the version everyone saw? Colbert sat alone in his office, tie undone, fingers still curled around the last joke he never told. On his desk, the segment rundown was still visible. Guest number 1, Schwarzenegger topic. Film working class voices tone, light, nostalgic, optimistic. None of those words had survived the segment. He opened Twitter. #Arnold trended alongside words like dignity, truth, and walked off. But he hadn't walked off. He had stood still, and the show had moved around him. Colbert closed the laptop. And for a flicker, just a flicker, the mask slipped. In a small editing bay across town, a junior video editor, not affiliated with the show, just a fan who'd attended the taping, uploaded a short clip filmed from the audience. Arnold, sitting in silence. Colbert speaking over him. The moment the tone shifted. The moment the crowd stopped laughing.
No commentary. No hashtags.
Just a caption, this didn't air. By sunrise, the clip had 10 million views. At home, Arnold was already up. Coffee brewed quietly in the kitchen. He wore a plain grey t-shirt, same one he'd slept in. No press team.
No publicist.
He fed his dog. Read a few handwritten letters stacked on the kitchen table. One was from a retired steelworker in Pennsylvania. Another from a 17-year-old girl in Idaho who said her father cried watching the leaked clip. He read each slowly, deliberately, not as a celebrity, as someone who knew what it meant to be unseen. Outside, the hills of Brentwood shimmered in the early light. But inside, he wasn't high above the world. He was right where he started. Later that morning, Colbert's team gathered for the post-mortem. "We frame it as scheduling conflict," said one producer. "We issue a joint statement," said another. "Nothing inflammatory." "But he hasn't commented publicly," someone said. They turned to Colbert. He didn't look up from his coffee. He won't. The room paused. "Then what do we say?" He exhaled slowly. "Nothing." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't strategy. It was surrender. A day later, the story was everywhere. Cable news debated the ethics of gotcha interviews. Columnists dissected the power dynamics of late-night TV. Hashtags evolved into manifestos. But through it all, Arnold remained silent. No tweet.
No soundbite.
No interview. And that silence, that deliberate absence, became louder than any reply. People began quoting him without tagging him. "You shout for applause. I pause for truth." It was printed on t-shirts, memes, headlines, even on a cardboard sign at a union rally in Detroit. And yet, he said nothing. Because some truths don't need defending. They just need to be witnessed. Back in the studio, a new guest sat in the same chair Arnold had occupied. A young actress. Rising star. Bright. Eager. Colbert smiled. Read the intro. Delivered a perfect opening joke. The crowd laughed. But a beat too late. As if their instincts had slowed. As if they'd remembered something, or someone, who had once filled that same seat with something heavier than charm. Later that night, Colbert stood alone on the empty stage. No cameras. Just a technician adjusting rigging in the ceiling above. He walked to Arnold's chair. Sat down. Faced the host's desk. He folded his hands. Stared into the nothing. And whispered the question he hadn't dared ask out loud. Who's really hosting this show? In homes across the country, in living rooms and bedrooms and late-night kitchens, people rewatched the clip. Not for drama. Not for celebrity. But for something rarer. A moment when someone didn't blink. Didn't sell. Didn't perform. Just stood still, and let the world move around him. And in that stillness, a different kind of leadership emerged. Not louder. But steadier. He didn't need to say another word. Because long after the jokes faded and the spin dissolved, he was still standing. And the stage? Still empty.